10 things from the Bible that have been confirmed by archaeology. So I recently released a video about 10 things in the Bible that we have yet to find in archaeology. And if you watched that video and paid very close attention to it, you will have noticed most of the things that I'm going to talk about. But apparently, a lot of people didn't really notice that. So here are 10 things from archaeology and from history that confirm the Bible. So, number 10, the city of Nineveh. So it's quite easy to forget now, because belief that the city of Nineveh existed is mainstream. It's a major archaeological site in the Middle East. No one challenges it anymore at all. But once upon a time, centuries ago, back in the the days of penal laws of England, they questioned if the city of Nineveh existed. It was as mythical as Sodom and Gomorrah. Spoiler for what's coming up next. That being, and you can tell this by looking at works like the Haydock commentary, that mention it as being a place that we don't know where it is, how big its city walls were. That has all since changed, and we know quite a bit about the Assyrian Empire and the city of Nineveh now. Number 9, King Ahab is mentioned in the Bible and is actually quite well known in the historical record. They found his palace in Samaria, and he is named and mentioned in other inscriptions from other kingdoms as being at the Battle of Qarqar in Syrian records. So no one really questions in biblical archaeology if King Ahab existed. And indeed, he was known for being quite wealthy, as the Bible mentions, to the point where secular archaeologists will try to argue that most of the stories about King Solomon and his kingdom and his wealth actually apply to King Ahab. Okay, number 8, King Jehu. So for those who don't know the Bible that well, King Jehu was a major figure who destroyed the house of Ahab at the express command of God. He was anointed by the prophet Elisha, and then chased after the kings of Israel and of Judah and shot them in chariots. And Queen Jezebel was then killed by him, by her being thrown out of a window and run over by Jehu in his chariot. We actually know what King Jehu looks like. So if you paid attention closely to the thumbnail of this video, that the man who's bowing the picture, that is King Jehu. That is actually King Jehu. He's mentioned on the black. That image is from the black obelisk of Shalmaneser, which can be seen today at the British Museum. So if you ever want to see a picture of an actual Israelite king mentioned by name in the Bible, go to the UK and take a look at the British Museum, and you can see it on display there. Number 6, the Apostle Peter. Now, in the back of the 1950s, numerous excavations were done at the site of the tomb of the Apostle Peter to find out where he was actually buried. And eventually, early church records mention that at that site there was an early church monument at the tomb of the Apostle Peter. So they dug down, and they actually found the monument now, and they found a pile of bones in the center with various parts missing, indicating that the man had been crucified, as well as a skull that was missing. And these were identified with the bones of the Apostle Peter. Now, this actually lines up quite well with the historical record, as it is known in the Middle Ages there was a previous excavation of the tomb of the Apostle Peter, and his skull was removed and kept in another shrine in Rome in the Lateran Basilica. So you would expect to not find Peter's head on his shoulders in his tomb. You'd also expect to find his feet missing, which, as I recall, was what happened, as that was the easiest way to take down his body from the cross. He was crucified upside down. Furthermore, we also have early Christian graffiti from within the living memory of the Apostle Peter, invoking the Apostle Peter for prayer. So that for prayers and for prayers for the dead as well. So that's an early reference to purgatory, as well as saint veneration in the early church, as well as confirming archaeologically, even if you think they got the wrong bones, the Apostle Peter at some point was buried there in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and The archaeology confirms that. So yeah, Peter, the Apostle Peter existed. Number 5, speaking of people of close relationships with God, how about we have proof of the prophet Isaiah. Now, we don't have his tomb. Well, actually we do, but to my knowledge it's never been excavated. But we do have his physical signature. So the Israeli archaeologist Dr. Alat Mazar, back in 2005, around that time period, if I'm recalling correctly, was doing excavations at Mount Ophel, where she found a bullae. So a bullae, for those who don't know, it's like, you know how you have people back in the days had signet rings? They would stamp a piece of wax or clay, and the impression left, and they would leave an impression on it as a way to sign their names. That piece of clay or wax that had been stamped is known as a bullae. They found a bullae in on the Mount Ophel site that said belonging to the prophet Isaiah. It has been dated to the 8th century BCE, the time period of the prophet Isaiah, and there is a bit of dispute about it as to whether or not it means Isaiah, prophet, as the Hebrew word would be Nevi, and there's a missing letter, and that would indicate whether the term Nevi is referring to a prophet as position, calling from God, or prophet as in a place called Nevi. That being said, we know that there is a missing letter, and that letter can only be one thing that would make sense, and that would be a qualifying letter that would indicate prophet as in position. So yes, we have the physical signature of the prophet Isaiah. I believe, as I recall, I think you can see it in the Armstrong Institute today in Jerusalem, if any of you are ever visiting. Furthermore, this was also found in situ next to a seal belonging to the king Hezekiah, the contemporary of the prophet Isaiah, as well. Speaking of King Hezekiah, number 4, Hezekiah's monotheistic form. So as I've already mentioned, we do have the seal of King Hezekiah, who is a major biblical figure and contemporary of the prophet Isaiah, mentioned as one of the good kings in the Old Testament for putting down idolatry and even illicit worship of the true God. Now, that we're not just talking about the existence of Hezekiah, we're talking about his monotheistic reforms specifically. Now, this is quite relevant, as a lot of the people I mentioned so far are like, oh, these people are mentioned in the Bible, they're real figures. No, I'm talking about evidence for the theology of the Bible being found in the archaeological records. So, one of the arguments that people try to make is that the Israelites did not believe that there was only one true God until centuries later, and they got the idea from the Persians. Some of what we found in Tel Arad in southern Israel conflicts with that. So Tel Arad was a site that is centuries old, from Canaanite times. It was still in use, I think, even in Byzantine times, and it was active, of course, in the time of David and of King Hezekiah. Prior to the life of King Hezekiah, a temple had been built there, contrary to what we know about the Jewish law, which forbids any temple to the God of Israel save in Jerusalem. There's even idolatrous worship going on there. As I recall, there was even an article that examined the residue on the incense burners there, and they were burning a mixture of frankincense and weed. I think there was another YouTuber who said it was, quote, literally a high place. Very literally, the point where you would have, and the way the structure was designed and the amount of incense of the cannabis that was being burnt would have given people hallucinations. There was some interesting cultic activity going on there, definitely contrary to God's law, as we'd understand in the Bible. So this clearly contradicts the Bible. Not so much. For two reasons. One, the Bible does record that stuff like that was going on, so that really doesn't disprove the Bible. Number 2, we actually have evidence that that at least certain sections of the population did not think this was legitimate, because we have evidence that the site was canceled. So, after 50 years of the site being built, the temple was destroyed. It was not destroyed by a military campaign. It was pulled down. The standing stones were taken, laid down flat, and buried over, and the site was repurposed. Around the time, and the dating for this would be around for the time of King Hezekiah, who was known for who explicitly mentions in the Bible that he tore down illicit altars to the God of Israel and idolatrous altars. So, if the Israelites did not believe there is one true God, why do we find evidence of monotheistic reforms prior to the time of the Persians, when the Israelites were supposed to have learned the idea of there being one true God? Simple. The Israelites already believed there was one true God, or at least a certain section of them did, and were trying to promote it and enforce it among the Judean population at that time. So yes, there is evidence for belief in only one true God prior to the Persian conquest. Number 3. So let's go back much further to the time of Abraham. Let's talk about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So those of you who don't know, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were known for being extremely evil, wicked cities. I'm not even going to mention some of the stuff they were doing according to the Bible. It was pretty horrific. So look in the book. So look in the book of Genesis for that account. For those of you who want to look it up. But anyway, it was supposed to be the residence of Lot, the nephew of Abraham, and his wife and 2 daughters had to flee the city because God decided He was going to destroy the city. There weren't enough people in it who were even remotely decent to justify destroying it, to justify not destroying it and sparing it. So it says fire and brimstone fell down from heaven, consumed the cities of the plain, and it said to destroy the cities of the plain, and essentially that was that. The cities were destroyed, and Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt when she looked back at the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. This is all a myth, right? Not quite. So, for many years, pardon me, I'm doing this very roughly. This is a very rough map of the Holy Land. This would be Israel. This side would be present-day Jordan. This would be the Dead Sea. And right up around here, you would find a circular plain. Now, for many years, people thought Sodom and Gomorrah was down here. A few decades ago, there were some people studying the text more closely, and they realized that there is an account of Abraham and Lot looking towards the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and realized that they were mentioned as being in a place called Ai, which we know where Ai is roughly, and we read it over here. So you go to Ai, and you turn towards the Jordan, you see a circular plain, which in the Hebrew text is known as a Qarqar. Means, again, circular plain. And there's only one place that can be. That drastically narrows down the sites of where Sodom and Gomorrah could be, because it says it's there. So I went through looking through all the sites. Eventually, they decided to look at the biggest site from around that time period called Tel El Hammam. Again, I'm very roughly drawing where it is. And they went there. They thought, Sodom is mentioned the most of the cities, so it's probably the biggest. They went there, and there was someone looking at the ground. And he picked up a stone called, hey, that's trinitite. What's trinitite? Oh, it's a type of stone that's formed in a nuclear blast. They had examined so they looked at the site, realized they had found a site from the time of Abraham, right where the city of Sodom is supposed to be, that had been literally destroyed, and the archaeological indicates that it was destroyed instantly by a meteorite exploding over the city. In other words, it was literally destroyed by fire and brimstone falling from the sky, as per the Bible. Gee, I wonder if that's biblical Sodom. So they've found Sodom and Gomorrah. If you ever go to Jordan today, please take a look. There's some great podcasts about it called Traveling Down. Please look it up. Number 2. Number 2, the Exodus. Yes, we do actually have proof of the Exodus. Now, this is one of the things that always annoys me, is that whenever you go online, people try to talk about proof of the Exodus. They try to talk about, like, volcanoes in the Sinai Peninsula and all these iffy things. And the most frustrating thing about it is that actually, if you talk to mainstream, I'm talking like even secular, atheistic, biblical archaeologists, the belief that the Exodus happened as a historical event is actually pretty mainstream. So, for example, Dr. Israel Finkelstein, again, who is not known for being a big believer in the Bible and the biblical archaeological community. Whenever they cite a skeptic of the Bible in the biblical archaeological community, they cite him pretty well always consistently. He's always the go-to guy for that. I remember watching a podcast that he was doing. He did a few years ago, and he was mentioning that, yes, he is of the opinion that there is archaeological evidence that there were some people from after the Hyksos fell. There's some people who crossed over the Sinai Peninsula and came into the Holy Land from across the Jordan and settled there and converted a chunk of the population, but they were a core group, and that the Exodus story is based off of that there is truth behind the Exodus story. He might question how many people came over, how long they were in the desert, etc. But no, he did absolutely believe in the Exodus. He does actually believe there was an Exodus event. In the debate is not so much whether it happened, but when it happened and how many people exactly is what's actually going on in the biblical archaeological community. So let's talk about the evidence we actually have for this. There are two things that convince even secular archaeologists that the Exodus happened as a historical event. And no, we're not talking about chariots in the Red Sea. The evidence we have is actually in the Holy Land itself. So there are two things. The first thing is settlement patterns in Mount Ephraim. So in the book of I believe in Joshua, if I'm recalling correctly, it mentions how Joshua told the people of the tribe of Ephraim to cut down trees in the woods and build new settlements. Settlements there. So not just going to inhabited cities that are already inhabited, but they're building new locations and they're to build new communities out of the woods, out of nothing, essentially. Now, I was watching a talk by, I believe it was Dr. Yosef Garfinkel of Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he was talking about some archaeological digs they had done in further north. Again, this would be right around here. And he's talking about settlement patterns that they discovered that would be dated from around the time when Joshua was supposed to come into the Promised Land. And he says that you get all these new material culture, these new settlement patterns, and what's more, based on when they're being founded, they seem to be coming from across the Jordan. So you do have archaeological evidence of people coming from across the Jordan, as per the Bible, and settling there, and settling in Mount Ephraim. Furthermore, if right around here you get a place called Mount Nebo, big huge mountain, Jordan. Now, now we haven't found anything on there, but we do know there's something there because something that was found further south around here, the land of Moab. I am talking about the Mesha Stele. It's essentially it's from a much later period, and it talks about how a Moabite king had defeated the king of Israel and had sacked and destroyed a temple to Yahweh on Mount Nebo. Now, we know there were plenty of Israelite temples to Yahweh outside of Jerusalem. That being said, the Israelites just weren't always building these big temple complexes willy-nilly. They were at major sites, normally to commemorate where the border was for the empire, and also major religious sites and the Judean mythology. Forgive me for calling the Bible mythology. In a historical context, in a classics context, mythology just means an important story. Doesn't mean it's true or false one way or the other. It just means it's a very important story. So, for example, further north, we have found an Israelite temple at Penuel, where Jacob was supposed to wrestle God. So and we have further south, we have evidence of a border temple in Timnah, in Edom. And you found a place called Yahweh. And they found Ostracon, where they even tried to draw pictures of the God of Israel, Yahweh, and they even drew him with a cow head, as I recall correctly. And he's worshipped as Yahweh of Timnah. Now, that being said, what can we think of a Mount Nebo that commemorate what would they be commemorating in Mount Nebo? Why would there be this right temple there? If you read your Bible, well, look at Deuteronomy. That is where Moses died. So, and keep in mind, this would not be that far off from when this temple would have been built. We're talking like 400 years. We're talking 400 or 500 years when it would have been built. So it's like us commemorating the history of the Protestant Reformation today if you're a Protestant, or commemorating Lepanto or the Sadi or St. Pius V in the Catholic context. That's not that long. That's enough. That shows that the Exodus tradition was well known, and the figure of Moses was at least tacitly, implicitly known, and there's evidence that, yes, they're commemorating a real event. There was a major figure who died on Mount Nebo, and there were people in the whole who crossed over from the Jordan. Also, based on the timing, there is, especially depending how you date the Exodus, there is evidence, and the evidence that the Israelites coming to the Promised Land and the expulsion of the Hyksos from Egypt probably do have some connection. And these even figures like Joseph Garfinkel have explicitly made that connection openly, that there's probably some sort of connection there. And this connection has been suggested even centuries ago by figures like Flavius Josephus. So yes, we do actually have evidence of the Exodus. In the second place, we have the evidence of David's kingdom. Now, we have not found the big palace of King David. Well, actually, some people argue we have. Actually, there's it's known as a stone step structure in Jerusalem. Diplomatically, the woman who excavated it, Dr. Alat Mazar, again, famous biblical archaeologist, was of the opinion that it dated to the time of David and should be seen as David's royal palace. Again, other figures like Finkelstein dispute it, and a lot of the pottery that does date to the time of David, however, was not found in situ. So there is there's no inscription saying this is David's palace. That being said, she used the Bible to figure out David's palace should be here. She dug down and found a palace. There's also evidence of a Phoenician-style architecture. So that being said, it is debated. It is debated, but I'm not going to even focus on stuff that's being hugely debated or controversial in that sense. I want something a little more solid, and we do have stuff that's more solid than that. So again, we got two things that show there was a kingdom of David. So number one, we have another stele. So stele, you don't know, those are think like a tombstone. They're like memorial stones. This is known as the Tildan stele, boasting. It's by a Syrian king boasting about the enemies he had defeated. This would be like 200 years after. This would be like 200 years after the time of David, and mentions him beating the head of the house of David. Now, there is controversy as to what the word David there means, because it can also be translated as king's uncle. That being said, based off of the context of the text, it's common to mention the king as being the head of the house, king of the house of famous ancestor who founded dynasty. Head of the house of Omri, as for example, is referencing to beating the head of the house of the northern kingdom of Israel, for example, because Omri founded the house of King Ahab. So is he going to just randomly, for no reason, mention beating the king's uncle rather than beating the king of the house of David? It makes more sense logically to say that he's talking about beating the head of the house of David. So it's again, this is 200 years after Jesus. So this would be like us talking about the American founding fathers today, essentially, for distance and time. So we have reference to the house of David, and implicitly, King David would be the head of that house. That is, however, not the only thing that we have found. So Joseph Garfinkel was actually doing some, again, great archaeologist, he was mentioning some things that he found in the architecture in southern Israel. So most houses in the north are designed this way. This is how most cities are designed in the north. So over here you have like a city wall, and there'd be a street, and then a row of houses. In southern Israel, you have the city wall. You have houses attached directly to the city wall. And that's how they're designed. Now, this sounds very boring, right? Here's the thing. That's a unique style of architecture. And in archaeology, you look for patterns. You look for ways things are set up differently. So, for example, you find a lot of Chinese architecture. Maybe the Chinese are influencing things here. We do... So what's going on? So when you see the same type of architecture in a certain place, it indicates a common system of government or common culture. All those houses attached to city walls, cities designed like that, he found multiple of them. Notice there's a pattern, and they all seem to be circling one city as their main that seems to be their main center. Guess what city that is? Jerusalem. So you have all these settlement patterns centered around the city of Jerusalem. Now, as to why you may not be finding things further north, Saul existed as well. One of my alternative theories is that King Saul existed further north as well. And by the way, this is a bonus thing. Yeah, people think Saul existed as well because we have evidence of the Pharaoh going on campaign and avoiding that the area that he would normally go through during the time of King Saul, because he's centered up there and is a warlord and ruling things. So if you already have taken the north, you're not going to tear down a bunch of cities and just build new ones. You're going to use the old cities, obviously, if they still work just as well. And so, but yeah, like you have that being said, it's well known that the south was always in flux because of the Philistine invasions. Who would have guessed? And you find evidence of David fortifying it and shoring up the border there, and that's why he centered on Jerusalem, which is quite a common practice. Like, you live near the border, you live near the border where the enemies are. You want a place that's comparatively close to the north that you're trying to keep control of as well. Jerusalem would be a perfectly logical city to do all that from. But yeah, we do have archaeological evidence of the time of David, because guess where all these fortresses date from? Guess when they were built? 10th century BCE, which is the time of King David. Now, for the top number one thing in biblical archaeology that we found. Excuse me a moment, because I just need to do this. Okay, here. A nice sweater. I need to do this. This will be perfectly fine. Excuse me. Jesus existed. Yes, Jesus existed. Yes, Jesus existed. Say it with me. Yes, Jesus existed. It is... I'm almost embarrassed I even have to say this. Here's the thing. We have found... Here's the thing. Now, there's a lot of Jesus' horse memes that go on the internet. That being said, when it comes to actual archaeologists who study biblical archaeology, I cannot think of a single person who questions this. Let's go off. In fact, we even know where Jesus died and was buried, 100%. Even if you're an atheist, we know where it happened. So, for example, we know that within 300, there was a long tradition of the site of the Church of the Sepulchre being Jesus' tomb, even from long ago, early Christian times. We know that the Romans tried to cancel the site. They literally tried to bury the site. You can still see ruins of the Roman temple built on the site, and we know the Romans tried to do the same thing on the Temple Mount. That's one of the reasons why we know the Jewish temple was up there at one point. So they went out of their way to bury this huge site covered over with dirt, and repurposed it because they knew Christians were going there. Furthermore, we have, and this was recorded in Christianity and in Christian history, church fathers like Eusebius of Caesarea, who matter of factly knew this is where Jesus' tomb was, and they, as a result, is they put a big "hit me" sign, big sign that says this is where it is. So when the first Christian emperor's mother wanted to find Jesus' tomb, she just had to dig it out, essentially. They did find the proper hill of Golgotha right where it's supposed to be, as well as the tomb of Jesus, which, by the way, has been dated and is the correct design of a tomb of the Roman period, which matches the biblical description of a new tomb from the time of Jesus. So, for example, this is the Church of Lake Sepulchres. This is the tomb of Jesus design. Let me just draw it for you briefly. So it would have you go in, there'd be an entry chamber, there'd be a small well there, and right over here you'd have I drew it very poorly, but there you go, try to highlight here. You would have a ledge to put the body on. And it would probably face, and it would be facing towards Temple Mount. That is a Roman area tomb. Furthermore, in 330 AD CE, you have Christian graffiti there saying this is the tomb of Jesus. It is Jesus' tomb. We're pretty sure where he was crucified. This is not to mention the fact that, considering that in human terms, purely human terms, Jesus is a random rabbi from Galilee who preached for 3 years and then was executed by the Romans. We have 4 accounts of his life written within living memory of where he lived. Like the latest, people talk about how late the Gospels were written. Not really. Like the latest one, I believe, is around 90 CE, 90 AD. Keep in mind, Jesus was crucified in the year 30, around the year 33 CE. That would be around the time of his death, roughly. So, yeah, so basically, I know people who are older than 90 years old, and they remember things. Like, I work for a boss currently. She's over 90. Help her with things. She's an amazing woman. She's cognitive. She's all there. It isn't, and that's the latest gospel that's written. It is not inconceivable in the least that the Gospels were written by the eyewitnesses of these events. For comparison, the longest biographies that I'm aware of Alexander the Great are dated to like 400 years after he would have lived. I think there's maybe an inscription that mentions Alexander the Great in a temple in Egypt, but and similarly with Julius Caesar, we have like one account, not 4, that gives detailed accounts. And by and large, as far as accounts go, contradicting each other, I've read the Bible. You'd have to even if you do not believe in the infallibility of Scripture, even if you do think that you contradict, you'd be looking at contradictions so minor. And they don't. I need to make another video on that another time. But you're looking at things so minor that they're basically negligible. Like, no, Jesus, especially if you're using it to verify, did this person exist? Yeah, Jesus existed 1,000%. I'm embarrassed to even need to mention it. But yes, we do have archaeological and historical and documentary evidence for Jesus and all these figures in the Bible. And I'm not even touching on a bunch of controversial stuff. There's a whole list of other things that I could go into. This is just the tip of the iceberg of things we found that confirm the biblical archaeological record. I assume as time goes on, the year goes on, I want to make a bunch of YouTube video series on things we found in the Bible to confirm it, and eventually I'm probably going to make a 2-hour-long video on the Exodus at some point. There's just so much evidence that we have found. Anyway, those are 10 things that from the Bible that have been confirmed by archaeology, and these are not minor things. Again, this is just like comparatively off-the-cuff video. I'm probably going to make videos like this again, and there's a bunch of stuff. Anyway, God bless. Have a great day. If you want to learn more about traditional Catholicism or the traditional Catholic faith, link down below. Look into the Society of St. Pius X for original traditional Catholic Christian faith. Anyway, God bless. Have a great day.